We've got a lot of people here, so I think we're going to get started. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us to help us celebrate the opening of 3 really fantastic exhibitions. Glass in the Expanded Field, curated by Caitlin Vitalo. Architectonic, Bruce Dehnert Sculptural Ceramics, curated by Hilda York and Ingrid Renard. And Laura Moriarty, Resurfacing. We hope you'll have a chance to see the shows in person. We will be putting virtual tours on our website mid-February, so check those out. And also check our website for associated programs that will be listed in the next few weeks. I'd like to thank our funders, the New Jersey State Council on the Arts, a partner agency of the National Endowment for the Arts, the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation, and other foundations, corporations, and individuals. A special thanks to Basil Bandwagon, which partially underwrote Glass in the Expanded Field. We're grateful, of course, to all the artists who are sharing their work with us. We obviously could not do this without you, and thank you. The shows look beautiful, and so we're so grateful to have your work in the museum. I'd like to also thank Heller Gallery, one of the lenders to Glass in the Expanded Field. And, installing 3 exhibitions is a challenge at any time, but installing them during a pandemic probably borders on the insane. So I really wanted to give a shout out and a thank you to our incredible installation crew, so ably headed by Terry Fraser, who worked very closely with Sneha Ganguly of Raja Fine Arts. They did an amazing job. Thanks also to Yael Eisner, and a shout out to Lisa Heilman, Steve Mason, Carolyn Roy, and Tim Fraser for their assistance with that. Tonight, Caitlin Vitalo will talk about Glass in the Expanded Field. Bruce and Laura will talk about their work. And then they'll be joined by Jason Vartikar, the museum's curator of special projects, for a short discussion. And then we'll open the floor for your questions. So we're so happy that you're here tonight with us. Thank you. And I'm going to turn this over to Caitlin.
Okay. Can everyone hear me? Yeah.
Yep.
Thanks, Marjorie. Hi, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen and just do a brief presentation on Glass in the Expanded Field. Okay. I'm the curator of Glass in the Expanded Field, which opens tomorrow. It's a group exhibition of 17 glass artists. And this exhibition is highlighting contemporary glass and exploring the ways that glass has kind of grown from its roots, and how just how exciting contemporary glass is, and exploring a whole lot of different concepts and types of glass, from installation to blown glass to tiny dioramas and neon. So it's a really exciting show. I'm not going to show you all 17 pieces. I'm just going to show you 5, or else it would be a really long opening, but you can come see everything in person. So this is David Schneckel. His work in the exhibition is called Trajectories. This is just a close-up of one of his pieces, or a part of one of his pieces. It's exploring the cup and the vessel and the goblet as a material that we use to practice our skills, but he's turned the tables on the cup and is using the cup as a tool for discovery. So by creating these really finely made goblets and then melting them in a kiln, he watches them kind of fall apart and explores what happens when you unmake a cup. And Yeshuan Pan, her piece is made up of multiple parts as well. This is just one of her pieces in her whole Ice Cold, a Concept Glass album. This is her record cover. So she uses glass to create her own noises and music and the language of a glass blowing studio to create her own songs. So it's kind of like an ode to glass. So she's created this glass piece without actually having any glass work in her final piece. This is Ben Orozco. So he's representing Fag Signs, which is a company based in Brooklyn that is for the LGBTQ community and others who feel marginalized. And so Ben's piece called Identified Spaces highlights a lot of different pronouns and explores the power of language through neon, this material that we use for advertising. So he's kind of advertising these pronouns and these names and filling up the space with this really bright red glowing light. It looks really great in the gallery. We've got Kim Thomas. So this is one of two of her pieces, the cloud capturing apparatus. So Kim is exploring these ideas of human existence and wanting to escape, and how do you get away from things like that. And she created this really interesting kind of theory of catching these clouds and hooking on, you know, a little bucket so you can fly away in them. So these little dioramas are part of a greater piece so she's working on illustrations, and it's got the whole story to it. It's really interesting, and it's kinetic, it moves, it's awesome. And Kim is a lamp worker. So these are tiny pieces. And then we've got Evan Vogel with Eidos. So this is a glowing piece of glass. Evan creates his own color, which is really exciting, kind of like this mad scientist type of person in a good way. And he's exploring this idea of perception versus reality, and kind of what are we looking at versus what's really happening. So there's this piece of glass that's floating in this liquid material, and can't really tell like how is this object defying gravity, and how is it glowing. And so those are just 5 of the artists in the exhibition. So you kind of get a window into how diverse the show is. It's got a lot of different types of artwork. It's a whole different array of people from many different backgrounds, and of all ranges in their careers. We've got emerging artists like Scout Cartagena, and established artists like Deborah Shrestko. So it's going to be a great show. That's just a little highlight. And I hope you all enjoy it when you see it in person. So I am going to pass the mic off to Laura so that she can talk about her solo show.
Thanks, Caitlin. That was awesome. Okay, Jason, we ready? So hi, everyone. I'm Laura Moriarty, coming to you from my studio in the Hudson Valley tonight, where it's freezing. And I'm really excited about opening this show at the Hunterdon Museum. I called it Resurfacing because while I was when we planned the show in the spring, I actually thought we would be resurfacing by now, but a little bit longer, we'll hang in there. But anyway, we can go on to the next image. I'm presenting work in this show that's made of encaustic. Encaustic is a paint that's made from pigmented beeswax, and in order to work it, you have to melt it. So the big thrust behind my work is the process and that tension between the molten state and the solid state, and all these microstates in between that provide me with opportunities to manipulate the surface of the work in a variety of ways. This piece is called Skyscraper. It's one of the larger sculptures from the exhibition. I tend to work in a pretty modest scale. Most of my pieces could be held in your hand, but this is a little bit heavier and bigger. And, you know, I think of a piece like this almost like a journal. It's like, it's referring to geology, but taking a lot of poetic license with it. And we can move on to the next piece now. I made this reference to a journal, and in a lot of my work, there is a relationship to books and to illustrations that I find in books. And sometimes I look at these geological illustrations, which, you know, I'm fascinated by the way they're printed. Usually this is an antique print, but you know, they're handmade plates, and they just have this amazing detail and
just beautiful, beautiful color palettes, and every color means something. Anyway, I get very excited about this kind of thing, and especially these records of different strata. And, you know, it's like a landscape, but it's a landscape of what the landscape is inside the landscape in this cross-sectional way. You can go on to the next image, please. So this is a small arrangement type of thing, a collection called Jade Tableau. And it kind of shows a variety of little pieces that I've made, none of which are supposed to be like the grand masterpiece. They're more fragmentary. And I think of them almost like a little rock garden, a playful sort of rock garden where each piece is a different kind of rock and has a certain kind of energy that it's emanating. And some of them are very, very small, almost like little pebbles. And the way I make those is simply by, you know, painting out a number of layers on a panel. And then while the paint is still warm and malleable, pushing it off with a scraper and just kind of letting it fold onto itself. And as that little lump is cooling, I can form it more with my hands. Some of these pieces have really complicated sculptures on them because I'm going back over the form and painting on top of it and using the paint in a cooler way so that it creates this sort of accretion that looks like cauliflower or brain cells or, you know, tree lichen. And then other pieces are formed within molds where I'm taking smaller bits and embedding them within these larger forms that I then kind of liberate and work on almost like an amateur archaeologist. Like I've salted the dig by putting all these bits in there and I know they're in there. So I know I'm going to rediscover them and bring them back to the surface. You can go on to the next piece. Now these last two, I'm going to toggle between them because this is my most recent work and I made this especially for the show. And now let's go to the next slide, because while I'm making these sculptures, I'm also making these monoprints and I'm working in tandem. As I'm melting down an edge on the sculpture, I'm picking up the mark that it makes with the paper. So it's this constant push and pull back and forth between the liquid state of the paint and the solid form of the paint, which I'm treating almost like it's a custom crayon and it has all these surprise colors buried in it. And I just have to expose them. And then at a certain point, I'm looking at the sculpture itself, what I'm calling the implement here. And I'm deciding when that is sort of at a finished state. And that's it. That's my show here at the Hunterdon Museum. And I just want to thank the museum for having me. It's been such a welcome sort of goal to have during this pandemic to be able to work toward this show. Thank you. And thanks to everybody who's visiting us right now. Okay, and now it's my turn to turn it over to Bruce. Take it away, Bruce.
Thank you, Laura. I'm going to pull up share my screen here.
Contacts us. What's the daisy?
Are you seeing that? Brian, are you seeing that?
Not yet.
Do the view.
There we go.
Did you get that?
Yes.
Bruce, that's actually my computer, so just tell me when you'd like the slide to change, okay?
Oh, I see. So you're, okay, so I'm not sharing my screen.
Correct, yes. But it,
Okay. Okay. So welcome everybody. Thanks to everybody who has joined us tonight. And I want to thank Marjorie Nathanson for, making it possible for us all to get together, to get dressed up and have nowhere to go. And it's a real honor for me to show with Laura and Caitlin and at the museum. I also want to thank Hildy and Ingrid, who are the curators for the show. Their support over the years, and not just with the show, has been really appreciated. Ellen and the installation crew, I want to express a great deal of thanks to Brian, communications, and Jason, finally you, for handling this event. So thank you very much. I'm really honored to be showing at the museum. And okay, so Jason, I'm supposed to tell you when to
yep.
turn the slide? Okay, fire away.
Next slide.
So since my MFA studies over 30 years ago, I have been engaged in referencing my father's architecture. My dad's an architect in Wyoming, my mom a writer and journalist. The image on the left is the construction site of the University of Wyoming arena. The image on the right is the finished interior of the arena, where things like rock concerts and jazz concerts and minor events like men's basketball and women's basketball and volleyball happen. That's a shout out to all the artists out there. But the one thing that I want all of you in the audience to take a look at on that image on the left is the superstructure of the arena. The angles and the walls. If we think back to the Salisbury Cathedral back in the 1100s, that cathedral was built on 12 inches of gravel, crushed rock, crushed stone, and has flying buttresses that support that magnificent building. And so you take it all the way to today, and this modern architecture does some pretty amazing things through material and process, but it harkens back to and references back to huge long time ago. So I'm really interested in using my father's motifs and his way of approaching the aesthetics of his design. And so you can change the slide now.
Next slide.
Next slide. So the first, go back to the slide before that. My sculpture work starting back in my MFA program was a reference to the way that my dad walks a really fine line in his architecture between refinement of space and the guts of a building. So dating quite a long time ago, he was already experimenting with and exploring some very modern kinds of concepts. And that is that if you walk through one of his spaces, you notice right away this wonderful mixture of materials, this juxtaposition of different processes and so forth. But then you look up, and in the ceiling, you'll see the guts of the space. So the air venting systems, the electrical systems, the plumbing, that kind of thing. So there's this really wonderful contrast between the two. Next slide. So when I started thinking about building the last 30 years, because I made pots, I really struggled to find a way to bring in the architectural aspects of my sculpture and into my studio pottery, into functional pots. And so this little piece kerf is part of that. Next slide. And with that piece, you're dealing with just the most basic element architecture, and that is just a little snippet of a wall. And this piece, which is a whiskey charger, has on it a blueprint or a drawing of a building, and this references, you know, the old Western storefronts from where I grew up. But I don't necessarily want to make my drawings in such a way that it's super obvious what the references are. I want things to be abstracted. Next slide. Now, this is a piece that's actually in the exhibition, and I've never considered myself a political artist. If and when I've ever referenced politics, I've done it in a very subtle sort of way. And this piece has two clues to the, not necessarily the politics, but the ethics. And the first one is the title. That's Vindman, which references to the young man who offered testimony during the first impeachment trial. And then one of the things I noticed about him in a photograph was the color of one of his military ribbons was kind of a violet color. And so I invented a glaze that could be used in this particular pot. So it's not like I want the viewers to go, oh yeah, this is about some kind of political statement or whatever. That's not all that interesting to me. It's a place to get started. Next slide, please. So we can go back one, the other way. There we go. This one is called Oreball. And the title of the piece is based on an iron ore mine in my hometown, just outside of my hometown, Lander, Wyoming, which mined iron ore. That ore came out here to Bethlehem, Allentown, which is just south of us here at Peters Valley. So the title gives us a little bit of a kind of a into what's going on there, but really it's about referencing industry, and it's about referencing some of the ductile iron work that I did during my graduate work and that I wanted to revisit. Next slide. These pieces all have suspended floors. I'm really interested in questioning that idea of vessels where we expect a floor to meet a wall. And so if I reference modern architecture, we find all kinds of examples of buildings that have floors that are actually suspended, and lofts and so forth. So I was kind of playing around with that. Also, I'm thinking about issues like, not issues, but natural phenomenon like tectonic plates, geographical, and so forth. Next slide. And the last piece is called Glissade. And this Glissade title comes from a technique that you descend a mountain doing on a snow field, where you slide down the mountain either on your keister on your feet and you use an ice axe. And so, you know, I'm interested in referencing forms that come from memory and come from my background and so forth, but not doing it in such a way that the viewer has to be aware of that. So allowing for the abstraction of these shapes and so forth to allow people who are looking at my work to bring their own experiences and their own perceptions and so forth to it. With this little piece, I have included in the upper part of the wall there a little tiny house, which references, for me, it's a little icon about architecture in itself. And the other thing I would say about these is that I start off thinking about a rectangle, but I try to make the corners something other than 90 degrees. And that forces me into having to deal with what to do between each of the four corners. And so a lot of the invention of the work comes from having to accommodate these non-90 degree turns in the pieces. And so that's a challenge for me. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much. Everybody stay safe out there.
Thank you so much, Bruce and Caitlin and Laura. It was just a real pleasure to hear you introduce your exhibitions, which I have seen in person as of today, and they're wonderful and delightful. And I encourage everybody to safely see these exhibitions if possible. So I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, try it one more time. Okay. Hi, so I'm hoping that we can kind of have like a 10 or 15-minute discussion and kind of open it up to everybody to ask questions. There are already some great questions that have come in, and I'd love to just kind of organically include them in the conversation. So please don't be shy. You know, we have about 100 people here, maybe more. If you have a thought, put it in the Q&A section or in the chat box, and we'll try to get to you. We usually can get to all the questions. So I just wanted to start out by not only congratulating all three of you, but and all the artists in your show, in your curated show, Caitlin, but by asking kind of a question that applies to all three of you, which is, I'd love to talk about durability and fragility. You know, we've just been through a really hard time. We're still in a really hard time. We're in a really precarious global situation. And these questions of the fragility of life, the durability of memory, the durability of material versus the fragility of all of our situations, you know, is on the forefront of our minds. So I thought it would be an interesting thing to talk about, especially with respect to each of your media. So, you know, Caitlin, you know, glass is a fragile material. Yet you're bringing us glass works, quote unquote, that are conceptual art. Some of them don't even include glass, right? Or very little glass. Some of them are made partly of plastic. You know, if glass can be as durable as an idea, what is our investment in calling an idea glass? Or what is your conception of glass in the expanded fields? How can we learn from this kind of expanded definition in relation to the kind of fundamental fragility of the material?
Yeah, so I guess just to start with the first part about the title of the exhibition and the expanded field of glass, it's kind of, it's based on, it started from this article from Rosalind Krauss called Sculpture in the Expanded Field. So I'm thinking a lot about the language that's used to define glass and glass art, and how people discuss glass and glass artists, and how glass artists represent themselves, and how much the material has changed from you know, the beginning of maybe the American studio glass movement to what people are making today. There's you know, the field is growing hugely. So I'm kind of searching for a new way to speak about glass as a material, so that it encompasses this really rich past and the exciting present that we're in right now, which is maybe a little less exciting currently because of the pandemic, but that's okay. And so, yeah, in relation to the fragility of glass and the material and the exhibition title, I think there is a lot of fragility within glass right now, and so it needs some strength and some discussion and some serious thought about how to conceptualize the material, and that's what I think a lot of the artists in this exhibition are doing. They're kind of giving it some strength. They're exploring the material in ways that's really exciting. And on top of that, I just want to touch on, you know, the rest of the expanded field of glass that I'm exploring in this exhibition, which is the people that are accessing the material. So it's just the field is growing significantly when it comes to who has access to it, whether it's gender, race, or sexual orientation. Like the community is just much more inclusive, which I think gives it a lot of strength, just as the larger the group of people and the wide array of thoughts that are present is really helpful for just strength of the community and giving the material some, a lot of purpose, as well as exploring kind of a breadth of age ranges and people at different parts of their career, things like that. So I feel like that partially answered your question. Yeah, glass is a fragile material. I think most glass artists maybe don't consider it as fragile as non-glass artists do, kind of manhandle it, I think, a little bit. But yeah, it's gaining its strength, and I hope that's what this exhibition is showing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think when I was referring to the conceptual piece, this is the one I was referring to. But I like what you say. It's really interesting to think about how your exhibition, which includes so many diverse presentations of glass making, is really about the kind of inherent contradiction maybe that is in the material glass itself, which is it's both really fragile and it's also really flexible, right? And really durable, right? We have Roman glass, we have ancient glass. Glass has this incredible durability, and yet it is the most fragile thing we can think of. So I love this idea that, as our world changes and becomes seemingly more fragile, that there's an inherent flexibility in our society that allows for something like this, a kind of identity politics to incorporate more and more flexible definitions of what it means to be human. So it's beautiful.
Yeah. That's just before we move on really quickly. That's that contradicting part of the materials, a big part of this show. A lot of the work explores contradicting concepts. With Evan, we've got perception versus reality. Sharon O'Mara is exploring ephemerality and these things that we wish were permanent, and dark humor and human existence. And it's kind of in line with the past and the present. The material as hard material, soft material, it's cold, it's hot. It's kind of the underlying theme throughout everything in the exhibition. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I'm as a scholar really interested in glass, and partly for some of the kind of things that we're circling right now, the kind of contradictions in material. Just to stick on that a little longer, but also maybe complicate our discussion before I turn to a question I have for Bruce. Is I was really struck in the exhibition by this work by Eric Goldschmidt, which is called "If One of Us Can't Breathe, None of Us Can Breathe." And I guess the one with the kind of pink drip that is the top of it, which is gem-like and beautiful in person, is probably called "Looking to a Rosier Picture." So if you look closely at the, I guess this would be called a goblet, a covered goblet. There's, he's with tubing, he's spelled out BLM that goes around the outside of this black goblet, for Black Lives Matter. So here's this extremely fragile goblet that is descended from a tradition of Dutch, European finery, right, that we see in still life paintings, that's meant to represent in those paintings the accumulation of wealth from things like the global slave trade, right? That's where these objects partly descend from. That's part of their art history. And yet this is completely kind of reinvented as this shining black goblet that has BLM on it. I think, does it have a likeness maybe of Eric Garner on it? I'm not sure, but it's a really complicated object. that recalls for me like Black futurism, right? Like a way of thinking about Blackness in the future, this kind of incredible, powerful, shining object that kind of turns the dark legacy from which objects like this come on its head. And yeah, so Bruce, I wanted to ask you about your, hold on, I have to get the right slide. Your work Orball, which is so beautiful. And one thing I found about looking at your objects in person is that they're ruinous, they're complicated, you kind of, looking at them is in a way like Laura's work, like engaging in an archaeological dig. You can really put your eyes in all the crevices and look underneath them and around them, and they change. But I noticed that a lot of them have these scars and abrasions and pockmarks, and that's why I brought this image. I was wondering if you could speak about that in terms of these themes of like fragility versus like durability, or just in general.
Yeah, there are drawings. There are quite a few drawings underneath the glazes. So as I'm building, I do these drawings, but I also do these drawings knowing full well that a majority of them are going to be disappeared from the glaze. In some cases, vestiges of those drawings will appear, and in other cases, the entire drawing appears. So I'm really, that's a great observation, Jason, because I'm really interested in allowing for the natural processes of heat and melting glass and so forth to have their say in the work. And by that, some aspects of process and so forth are revealed, and some aspects are, I don't know, relegated to memory. They're out of there, and I know that they're there, but the viewer might not know that they're there. So I'm really interested in that push and pull between what I've done and what appears finally after the different firings that I do. So in the image that you have on the screen right now, I can tell you I was quite pleased that blueprint, that drawing, actually survived the firing. But maybe on that work, maybe 10 or 15 drawings we don't see anymore. But I know that they're there, and so that becomes part of what Caitlin was talking about, and that's memory. And that, I think, is a really important aspect for me as an artist, not necessarily as me as the viewer, but me as the artist. I know what I've done, and there's something kind of darkly satisfying in making a drawing on a sculpture or a pot like this, a vessel, and realizing that that isn't going to survive. None of us survive. None of us get out of this alive. So why should some of my drawings be any different than us? So yeah, on that piece, Orball, it's about a large aspect of that piece is about cantilevering, and there's a house next door to the house that I grew up in that has this pretty major cantilever on the back side of it, and which was accomplished only through some pretty interesting engineering, you know, on the residential front. And so it was kind of referencing that, but there are a lot of aspects that in the final, you know, in the final piece are not seen. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about how you shared about your father and these kind of the stadium, for example, in its state of half finishedness, and your works kind of course, evoke that process of construction, but they also invoke the opposite process of destruction, of falling apart, of, you know, parts that aren't quite held together, or have, you know, are barely held together, or something like that. it reminds me, given the title of your show, Architectonics, the way in which, cities themselves and buildings themselves are always part of this constant process of being constructed, being repaired, being destroyed. And, the ancient city of Rome, for example, is a perfect example of this. Like, what we think of as, modern buildings, a lot of the stone was like taken from Roman statues and Roman buildings, and it's called spolia, right? They were co-opted from older buildings and incorporated into new ones. So this process of like building and rebuilding, unbuilding, and then these pockmarks and scars, help to evoke that that intense process of construction and deconstruction that we're constantly by.
Yeah, well, what's interesting is that I've thought about fragment for over 30 years, right? I've explored the idea of the concepts that are possible to be represented by the use of a thing that we might call a fragment. And a fragment might be a shard. A shard refers to something that's been broken or left over from some kind of a process. Say, for example, Native Americans carving arrowheads, and they get these shards off of the arrowhead. That's a process shard, right? A shard in ceramics is, something's happened here, and it's been broken. And so shard has this really, and those are just two examples of that. So a shard has all of these amazing possibilities to it. And so throughout the last 35 years, I've been dealing with shards, but dealing with them as representations of something else that's happening along the way. And with these pieces, I find it really interesting, your question, because with these pieces, I've approached it not as shard, but as fragment. And the fragment gets me to where I need to go. The fragment allows me to hit a corner at less than 90 degrees or greater than 90 degrees and achieve rectangle or achieve oval or achieve square, triangle, etc. It's a geometric kind of enterprise there, or exercise. And fragment refers to something, and probably most importantly, fragment for me in these works, I'm using them to surprise. I'm using them to kind of throw us out of the predictable. This is a straight wall meets another straight wall, meets a floor, meets a ceiling, meets a lid, meets a whatever. I'm using fragment to break with surprise, just like, anybody who wants to surprise a viewer and knock them out of their predictions.
I love this idea of surprise a lot. And I guess before I turn to Laura, I love what you say about this kind of the meeting of the corner of the wall and the floor. And, I was thinking when we first were talking, I was thinking about that space that's behind all of our walls that we never see, these kind of surprise and mysterious spaces. And so I'll invite anyone who wants to safely see the show. There's this pot that's called Splay that's very beautiful. And you look inside and there's like a surprise, eye. it's very beautiful. It's like this little gem. So talking about
and I'm so glad that you this photograph, good job. I'm really glad that you noticed that, because that it's meant as a surprise. Yep.
Yeah, so Laura, I have so many questions for you, but I think and there's so much to say about these works. One thing that I wanted to ask you about was this idea of archaeology and geology that you brought up. It's interesting because seeing the show in person, I felt like, wow, these are so geological, and they're also not. They're also representations, they're inventions, they're art, right? You could never mistake it for a rock, right? Like you're never going to walk down the street and be like, oh, there's a rock. So I just was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the way that these are negotiating the durability, the infinite, geological durability of rocks and minerals versus the softness and the ephemerality even of wax.
Yeah, that's kind of the argument that I have with myself on an ongoing basis when it's like this topic is a constant obsession for me, because it's almost like the devil and the angel on your shoulder. On the one hand, you care about your work. You want to make things that are responsible, and, durable can be a way of thinking about it. But, and that looks like you put care into the object, not just threw it together and don't care that it breaks in a minute. But part of the reason that I work with this material and I feel so devoted to it is because it gives me this process to explore, which allows me to really find like unending metaphors, not just for nature, but also for culture. And it goes back and forth like that, I love the fragility. I make things that are insanely fragile, and then I lecture myself, like, why did you just do that? What do you, like, why put this in the world? And there's also that responsibility of what I do put out in the world. I think probably all artists beat themselves up, or at least hold themselves to a certain standard. And when it comes to wasting material, we don't like to do that. We tend to value material and want to put it to good use or reuse, or so I don't know if I'm addressing your question precisely, or whether I'm going off on my own little tributary here, but this is something that I'm constantly going back and forth with.
No, I think it's great, and I it's so interesting to think about how that tension is a productive tension for you. And I guess maybe that's really exemplified by the fact that you make these encaustic monotypes, and you make these soft sculptures. And then am I getting this process right? That you have these hot plates and you kind of sandwich or somehow smooth out the sides of your works to get them like panini style to like,
well, the comparisons to cooking are pretty accurate, probably. It is like those kinds of processes where, no, I have I wonder if you can see it. I have this very large hot plate. It's like a professional style printmaker's hot plate. You can see the edge of it here, right?
Totally.
And it's 24 by 36 inches, so it's pretty big. And, it's controlled by electricity. So I turn it on and that steel top gets really hot. And I just take the form and slide it on edge. And it makes this sort of beautiful spillway. And then I lay paper on top of that, really just like a print would go through a press, and pick it up. The only thing is the wax is molten. It's really liquid when the paper lays down. So it's not like making a print in that respect where everything's locked in place. It's very fluid. So, you can play with that or try to control that aspect of it as well.
Right. So it's like the wax, which is this soft and fragile material, suddenly enters the world of the archive of the durable, of printed matter that gets framed, right, and has a certain shelf life or something. I don't know. I love your work. I want to think more about it. I think there's some really interesting kind of comments from people in the audience, and please, if you have any thoughts or questions, type them in. So like one interesting point is about Steve Cook says, I like the relationship between the nature of glass and the nature of ideas. Both can seem eternal and yet disappear instantly, which I think is really beautiful and kind of it encapsulates kind of all the things we were circling in our conversation, which is about how ideas and materials can enter this new and expanded field in which you know, the falling apart and putting back together becomes part of their richness and their complexity, the angels on the shoulders. So I wanted to ask you both, all three of you, one more question. You know, we only have, say, 5 to 10 more minutes, but about, you know, all of your works, or for Bruce and Laura, your works are idiosyncratic. There's a voice, there's a style. And for Caitlin, it seems like you're invested, or the show is invested in this idea of an expanded definition of glass that is truly flexible. And so I wanted to ask each of you if you might share something about your personal life or your childhood or whatever that inspires these various expressions that you've brought to the museum.
Well, when I was a child, I talked to trees. So and I really did talk to them and think that, you know, we were relating to each other. And when I'm working, I'm always reminding myself of that aspect of my childhood that was just so confident in the sort of vitality of everything, you know, and I think about that, you know, with any material I work with. I think of my friends, the trees. Anyway.
That's fantastic, Laura. I would really love to hear more about that. We should talk about that more. Yeah, no, that's fantastic. There's such immediate works in a way, you know, each you know, their wax work. So each intervention, you know, is a thumbprint of the immediate moment that you're experiencing, as it were, or a record, a mold or something. It's like it's sealed there. Caitlin.
Yeah. I mean, just to think of something from my childhood or just when I was younger, kind of, I think probably in relation to a lot of other glass blowers, you know, this constant search for excitement and questioning things, and kind of, I think, you know, being a troublemaker maybe, and pushing buttons and constantly wondering, like, what's the next thing, and why is this like this, and why does it have to be that way? So I think that's something that has kind of been with me my entire life, and also applies to glass for me, just as, you know, a troublemaker. When I was younger, I wanted to play with fire all the time, so that's a big part of glass. And then through this exhibition and the expanding field of glass, just, you know, when I entered the field of glass, wondering, why do people just have to make like vessels or pretty objects? That, like, why can't something say something more? And why does glass just have to be glass? And why can't it be an installation? And why can't it be this or something else? And I feel like, so that's something that I think is applicable to maybe all aspects of my life, including creating this exhibition, pushing buttons, questioning status quo. Yeah.
Totally. Well, here's a work that definitely, you know, troubles and complicates our expectations of what material is meant to do. And I mean, I think all of the works in the show push boundaries in some way. I love this, that there's, you know, the like a child playing with crayon or Play-Doh, there's an immediate way in which Laura's work is recording her play, her talking to trees, her her connection to nature, then expressed somehow in playing with wax, and then maybe you're pushing boundaries and you're, yeah, absolutely, in all these works, a kind of pushing the boundaries of what our expectations are. You're challenging the audience to be flexible as the material itself. So Bruce, do you wanna?
Yeah, you could put Laura's and Caitlin's answers together and you've got mine. I talk to rocks, actually, and I love trees, but I think I probably spent more time talking to rocks, and I definitely, Caitlin, pushed a lot of buttons. But I think probably my memory is that I bring into my work, probably the most prescient is having a mother who is a writer and a journalist. So she was connected to stories and explaining what's going on around us. My father, as an architect, I think he was telling stories, though I don't know if you'd have to ask him if he thought of it, that architecture that way, but certainly I did. And I had the really great privilege of being able to travel with him once in a while and watch him at work. For example, convincing a small town school board in Wyoming to invest in a solar building, a solar high school in the early 1970s or the idea for it, at least in the early 70s, that they were willing to take a chance on that kind of technology all those years ago. And that in itself is a story, and it serves as, for me, it serves as a way to, keep myself centered in what I do and to believe in what I do, and to take risks. That's probably, for me, the most important thing about all of that is being willing to take risks on what I assume to be my habits. Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful, and I think gets to, I think, one of the points of all of these shows, which is about kind of imagining a radical future or inviting a vision for new possibilities, imaginative possibilities that are not merely an escape, but are new ways of thinking about the world, whether it's architecturally or in terms of the flexibilities of glass or in terms of the geology that of our ideas and of our space that we all are part of, like on this spinning earth. So I guess that's all. Thank you so much to all three of you and to all of the artists who, like Marjorie said, brought their work and shared their work too with all of us in these shows. So thank you for joining us this evening. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you.
Bye.